Okay, let's see if we can kind of feel this a little bit, um, and maybe come up with some possible ideas as to what might cause the issue um, that synth or synthe is experiencing. Again, you're gonna have to excuse the cat. I don't know why when I talk, this cat literally is all over top of me. I have no idea. It's just gonna carry on. I don't know what it's doing. Um, okay, you all right, the little buddy? Come on, you can get my lap. All right, so if you take a look, um, if you take a look, you can see that it's okay. All right. You can see that. Come on this way. Come on this way. It looks like when he built his city plan, that it worked. It looks like initially it worked. You're okay. Um, he could see what was built. He could see the city. I don't know at what level the bug must have occurred. So we do know that at least initially the code to build the city works. Okay, so technically, you would have a list of objects. These objects can be, they call them like a static object or a collection, static call collection. And it would be where you take, let's say, four walls, a roof, and a floor, you combine them as one object. It'd be a static collection. So it doesn't necessarily have to render all four separately because it'll treat it as a whole object, almost like a prelude to like a precombine or previs. So we know there has to be a list of objects, and there has to be code that places those objects. A simple position. I forget the actual console command for it, but it's like position. It's got XYZ. So if you know what the object reference is, you can do just list from a console. You can do a place at me, and then you can, if as long as then you click on that object that you just placed at the player, and it'll give you the reference. That's the target of the console command. So any console command is going to go towards that target. So any data that that object has, according to the game, whether it's XYZ position on the screen or in the world, if you want to call it that, things like that, that's what you're affecting. So you can set the position anywhere, literally. The only thing it doesn't do is actually automatically snap unless it's in workshop mode. So that's what kind of like what transfer settlements does. But if you have a static collection, everything's already snapped together. So because it treats it as one object, so you literally can drop this whole object down. We know apparently. Well, let's just. I haven't seen on any of this, so I'm going to assume by reading this post here that we know that's working, because he says appreciate what the author has done. So that means he must be able to see the final product of the author's work, right? So when you generate, I believe with some settlements too, it generates a plugin, and that plugin basically more than likely has scripting code that takes a look at this object reference XYZ position. But of course, with Sim Settlements 2, you have, and that's basically what it does. If you were to build your city plan from the scratch up, not from the scratch up, but if you built it all at one time, it would load every single object it's supposed to load, place it in XYZ in a sense, and you're looking at your city. But what Sim Settlements 2 does is wrap that process around conditionals, such as do you have enough material? And that requires access to a data breakdown, an object breakdown data-wise to say what is the requirements, the expected requirement to, let's say, build a wall. So let's say it takes 10 wood. So he's going to have to, somewhere he's going to have a definition that says this wall takes 10 wood. Do we have 10 wood in virtual storage? So in a sense, it's just it's if I was to guess, if this was me and I did it, I would make a guess that there's data structures that define what these objects are. And depending on how many objects you have, this is the requirement for that object. So let's say you have a medical center that is a level 1 or level 0 medical center. You can put in a file, it requires these resources. And it's easy to check. do we have this in virtual storage, this, this in virtual storage, this, do we have steel, wood, whatever else might be needed. Uh, if we don't, then we're going to say we're gonna say we can't do this because it's short. Now you can throw up an icon. You can actually say you could click a button, say I want you to build this up, and it says nope, sorry, missing these items. Now in that case, what would be nice is if you had something that and this is overcomplicating it, and I'm going to get to that reason why. So it would be nice to say, okay, I've got some. Let's say you have city planners, and these city planners realize what's missing, and then they will automatically build something or change production, scrap production, towards what is needed to get the next phase done without the player having to say, okay, what am I missing? What city plan produces like steel? What city plan produces wood? Plastic, asbestos, asbestos, whatever. Instead of the user having to do that, you could have a city planner which does that. Basically, it's just a script, scans the data, says I need this. Let's switch production over to this. So it can dynamically. So you still have a scrapping facility, but based on what you're asking your scrapping facility to produce, you could just say you could have a simple data type and say I want wood, and therefore that's primarily what it's going to try to produce is wood, or I want asbestos, without having to set up a completely different building site for asbestos. Okay, so that being said, we know that it's working at least to some degree. So you have a lot of code in there doing a lot of different things. You have the code that lays out the city plan, that actually renders it from the data. You have conditionals that's wrapped around that data that says, do we have the resources? Do we have a mayor? Do we have a leader? Things like that. Had enough time pass by. So that's what you see a lot of the stuff in the MCM are just conditionals wrapped around when do we do something, pretty much when do we do something, such as upgrade the settlement. Okay, so he says it's happened a couple times. So here's a couple things that's a possibility. When you're starting, okay, so let's look at what SS2 does stepwise, and let's see if we can determine what might be involved in those steps that could cause this problem to occur. So the first thing is you select a city plan. So there has to be a list of city plans somewhere. So I'm going to assume that no matter what the city plan is, you're going to have a script or a plugin that will have a certain data structure in it, or it will inject something into a data structure like a list. So let's say you have a main script, and in this main script you have a list. You can call it a linked list, an array, kind of like the same thing. Well, it's kind of the same thing depending on what type of array you're talking about, but we're just going to talk about a linked list array, or an array list, I think, as it's programmatically called. So that's in your main script. You can reference that from any script. So you can put things in that list, and then your script, when you want to say which city plan do I want, or what house do I want to build, what plot type do I want to select, it looks to that list. So if other plugins put stuff in that list, then the code that says, look, I don't care what's in this list, I don't care where it comes from. My only task is to display whatever is in this list. Like a grocery list, whatever's in this list, okay? So if it comes from somebody else's plugin, it doesn't matter. If it's an erroneous city plan, it's not even a city plan. It could be just a bunch of garbage. If it's in the list, I'm going to show it. Don't care. So, and we're looking at that from a code, not the programmer, but the actual code itself. It doesn't care. So we can clearly see that. And then once you build your city plan, you can go back in and click on a plaque, which is an object. A plaque is simply an object in a game that has a script associated with it. So when you interact with that object, it can call the scripting function, which then does whatever that scripting function you want that scripting function to do. So in other words, you throw up um, a little notification that says this is the city plan, this is who did it, this is what level it is, and all of that. And you're accessing different data structures from different scripts. Okay, you can reference them. Um, okay, so how do you even know? Like when you click on a plaque, how does it even know what city plan you put there? Well, it has to store that information somewhere. That information has to be stored. It's probably stored under a work. I'm going to assume under a workbench ID, which is in that settlement ID, that workbench ID. So we know that's working initially. But somehow during the process of either upgrading virtual resources or somewhere in the process of other scripts firing off, either the index for the workshop, if he's kept it in an array, like let's say the first item in the list is Sanctuary, the second item in the list is Red Rocket, you would look at that as being item 1 and item 2. But usually with computers, they have a term called zero relative, meaning that the first element is 0, it's relative to 0, not 1, and the second element is 1. And that has to do with how you can calculate where in memory the next element is based on its index. You can subtract 1 from 1 to get you 0 relative, but normally it's called 0 relative. So either that index is pointing to an empty entry, in other words, somehow it got confused about what settlement it's at, or that data somehow got clobbered. It got overwritten or erased, or somehow there is a condition in there where if something doesn't exist, it automatically throws up, you haven't done anything yet. So it depends on the script. And that is a possibility because we do know that certain parts of the code is working. So what you have is an intermittent problem. It works, but then it doesn't. So here's what I think is happening. This is just a guess. I haven't looked at the code. I know it's complicated, but I'm looking at it as though I would have written it. So, and oftentimes programmers do think alike. We do think alike, and we approach problems very similarly. And sometimes that can be to a fault, meaning that the mistakes one programmer makes, we all make those same mistakes. And I'm not saying mistakes were made here, but it's just to let you know, to give an example. So, that being said, what I think is happening is when a project starts out, and this includes projects I've done myself, including this one that I'm working on now. When it starts out, you have a very clear idea of what you want pieces of that code to do. So, for example, you want it to render a building, so you read a list of objects and you put them in an XY position, okay? So you assume that's always going to work. You don't really think about what's going on at the same time. You don't think about whether those objects are necessarily there. You just because as your code gets more complex, you actually kind of lose. When your code gets more complex, sorry that it blanked out. You actually kind of lose track of what it's doing under the hood, really, really deep, your scripting wise and your code wise. So you're kind of like, okay, it draws objects. So anytime I want to draw anything, I'm going to call that routine. I'm going to call that script. But okay, so you do that and it works just fine. But then the scripting starts getting complicated. You start calling, you got so many scripts calling so many other scripts, and you're breaking them down into individual pieces. Like, for example, to simply render an object, you might say, I got to get the list. That's a script function. I have to then validate the list. That's a script function. I have to draw the list. That's a script function. So when you break it down into all these different chunks, the problems start to occur when your script when your project gets near completion and you're thinking, okay, I don't remember code wise what I did, but I know this function does this, so I'm simply going to call it. I know the parameters it uses, I'm going to pass that, I'm going to call it. But it didn't take into consideration something else was being done at that time. And that's what I think has happened to SS2. Because I think that pieces of the code, and I haven't looked at it, but it seems to be, well thought out, and the ideas are well thought out. But sometimes in execution, it can get difficult, especially when it gets complicated. So I think when KG goes in and he makes a change, he's fixing a pinpoint problem like it's under a microscope. And trust me, I do this a lot here. I'll fix something and then everything, I'm like, okay, I got this fixed. But then I change some code, I've got this fixed. Now I notice a week later something is broken that wasn't broken before, and I'm thinking, well, what happened here? Is this something new? But actually, it was because I made that change. I just haven't used that code yet, that other piece of code that was affected by that change. I hadn't called that yet. So that's part of that whole process. So I think that sometimes when things get complicated, and I've done that with this project here, is more time is spent chasing bugs, and it's like that ever, like you chase it over here but it moves over here because I've made one change in my code, and like I said, it broke so many other things. And what I usually do is I have to go back and rethink it, and literally rewrite that process, because now when I started I had an idea, and that idea, it made sense, and I could bring that idea into reality. I could code it into it worked. Um, but then, as I did more, I got better ideas. And then I went back and looked at what I wrote, and I'm like, why did I do that? Why would I even write? That's the dumbest thing I've ever. Why would I write something like that? And then I would go back and change it. And that seems to be the consistent metamorphosis of programming code, because that reflects the programmer. It reflects the actual programmer doing it. So you can throw too many things in too fast, and you will spend a big chunk of your time trying to track down problems. But here's the problem with that: a programmer can get just about anything to work. Like, for example, I've got a routine where I'm passing values to it. That routine should never be -1. Just as an example, this is hypothetical. Should never be a -1. But I'm getting a -1. I'm a programmer. I'm like, you know what? This is crashing my program because -1 shouldn't be there. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put an edit. If it's -1, exit out. Don't even process it. But I don't really care why that -1 is showing up. That -1 should not be there. It should never ever have happened. It should never have been, that routine should never been called with that value. So a programmer can really do some self-sabotaging things by actually putting in conditionals, trying to fix it without tracking back the source of the problem. And the bigger a project gets and the more people are expecting that project, the worse that can be. Because a programmer, and oftentimes a team doing something, it's hard for them to do something different. So it's kind of like, oh, hey John, you did the code testing on Ratchet and Clank, right? Yes, sir, I did. So what kind of testing did you do? Well, I did the animation testing. Well, here, test the animation again, because you have experience with that. It makes sense, and you can pick out the things we need. But the problem is, John tests the same things because his mind works a certain way. You have to get that to somebody else who thinks entirely different from you to see if they can make sense of what you did. And then oftentimes they can find the problem that the actual programmer can't. But the programmer can patch it. I can patch it by saying, oh, heck, because I can do anything. I can change the code however I want. I'm the coder, right? But that's not necessarily the best way to do it. And I'm encountering that now. That's one of the things that takes a long time to do this project I'm working on, is because it's like this stuff shouldn't even exist, but it does. And I know I have to rewrite stuff, and trust me, that's the last thing I want to do. After cups of coffee and headaches and sitting down on a couch or reclining back in a bed with a bunch of papers around me, trying to figure out how I'm going to approach a particular problem in the long run, what's going to be the final state of this product? What do I want from it? And then sketching this out, throwing it in, and then realizing halfway through, after a week and a half, this is not going to work. It's just not going to work. The technology is going to work right, because it's the way that I'm trying to do it is not the best way. So I'm going to have to redo that, and that is very discouraging, and it's very difficult to take that next step. So I think that what happened was, to kind of, and I could go on for hours about this, but I think what happened was, I think it got complicated. Too many functions are being called. that don't take into consideration other functions. So and I'll give you another quick example of this, and I don't want this video to be too long because I can make many more of these. Let's take a look at the loose file stream problem that a lot of people seem to have. I had it. I don't have it anymore. And they're like, well, when SS2 is played by itself, we don't have that problem. I don't see that problem. Therefore, it's got to be a conflict. Not necessarily. SS2 can be using. Okay, so let's take a look at the game and let's take a look at the code. Let's take a look at the concept of the code. Sorry, my throat's dry. Okay, so you have original game code, a gaming code, which is the official game. It does not use script extender functions. SS2 does. Those extended functions are linked in or hooked in through F4SE. So either F4SE provides the functionality or it hooks so other DLLs, basically code, can be hooked into Fallout 4 without triggering Steam to say this code has been hacked, I'm not going to allow it to run, because Steam has a kind of really interesting DRM method. They don't quite give you all the code until you're playing the game. All right, so anyways, but enough of that. So I don't want to. It's not enough of that, but I don't want to talk about that. So let's get back into this. God, I totally forgot what I was thinking. I definitely need coffee. What was I talking about? We were talking about. Let me see. I have to get my train of thought back. Somehow Steam got me off track. Okay, so you have the official code and you have F4SE. Now, other mods use F4SE functionality, right? So if Steam, if SS2 is played by itself, it's the only one making those calls, whether it's accessing lists or whatever it is it's doing. However, you add other mods that make those same calls, you have a mitigation issue. You have concurrent calls going on. Therefore, there is a chance something is going to get out of sync. Some data is going to be out of sync, where one mod removes something, but it's still in the SS2 list, and therefore it goes, well, where is this object? It's not here. I'm going to crash out. So again, SS2 is the only one that uses F4SE functionality, that extended script stuff, like Workshop Framework might use it. So, but I'm talking about the package, the actual package. So when you add other mods, you have concurrent calls to the same functionality, right? But we're not going to talk about locking records and locking lists. That you can do that programmatically fairly easily. But so that is what I think is happening. That is why I think those problems are happening. So when the team says, well, SS2 we don't have that problem, but now sometimes it is a mod conflict where scripts are being overwritten, which means code is missing in the script, so things won't work right. And you should be able to see that, I believe, in the Papyrus. I believe you can see that in the Papyrus. If you have Papyrus debugging set on, it should log when it can't find a function or a script. I believe. Don't quote me on that. You have to ask somebody on the team or somebody who knows more about that than I do. But I believe the answer to that is yes. So when you add these other applications that are also using F4SE, which it has to share the F4SE functions, then you start having problems. So to a mod author who, let's say, has TidyBot, it works great. I still use it. I think it's a cool little mod. I even have the medic bot in there, which is funny because he will literally bum rush you to heal you. If you can't outrun this guy. I've never seen a Protectron run that fast. And if I had a strobe light effect going on, I would definitely be freaked out. So yeah, that's what I think is causing the problem. And that's why you don't see it when SS2 is by itself, and you see it when other mods. So to say it's a conflict is not really true. Like I say, to me, a conflict is something that prevents something else from happening. But when you have a shared resource like a function call that is not taking into consideration that somebody else might be using this, and I don't know what F4SE has. I don't know if there is a I'm not even sure if there is a lock on it. I wouldn't think there is, because normally from a programming point of view, when you do inquiries, you don't normally lock something. You lock it when you change it. Now, if, for example, let's say you're doing an inventory thing, like let's say you're doing an inventory analysis and you need the cost of whatever it was an item is, you might need to lock a record that you would normally read, like let's say an item master, because you would want to lock whatever that price is and not let that price change. But most of the time with inquiry, it's not locked. But with an update, it is, because you need to wait until whatever update is being done before you try and access the data. If there's an internal error, like let's say it's trying to access something in a list and the list is locked, it may return blank. That's another possibility. I'd have to look at the code, or other people have to be involved with that. But I hope that gives you like some ideas on some of this. I've got a couple more vids I want to make here real quick. I got to make some coffee though first, and my throat's really dry. And see if I can help you guys come up with possibly other ideas, and at least a kind of an understanding of how a lot of this works. And this is not, I don't really have an ego per se. I mean, we kind of all have that id part, but so um, when I say that it really is simple, I'm not just saying that. Um, Coding is really simple. Like I say, processors only add and subtract and compare, and branching is still a comparison. You can do that kind of stuff, and multiplication it can be broken down into addition steps, unless you're doing like floating point and you need what's called an FPU unit, floating point unit, where it does that. Um, so it's not really that complicated. It can get complicated if, and I think what complicates it is many times people who use a mod or anything for that matter, they have an idea of how they think it should work and it doesn't, and they try to get more information, but they're almost denied that information. It's like it's not like a talk to the hand moment, but it's kind of like, I don't know how to explain it. And that makes it even worse because you have a whole community who knows even less and less about things, and that's great if you want to be the only person who knows anything. I'm not like that. I can't envision a world like that, because when I'm at work, I always, even if it's something they don't know anything about, I always share things that I know, because one time I might forget something, and it's happened before, and they've come up and said like, hey man, did you do this? And I'm like, oh, you are right, I totally forgot that. So a well-informed community can be a very, very amazing community and amazing asset. So it's a good thing. And yeah, and I think that's really the way everybody needs to go. But that's on a different subject. So I'm gonna leave that with you guys. I make some coffee, and I'll be back here in a little bit, and I want to try to break apart like an ESP file and show you where you can kind of get some, show you again data structures and where they kind of get this stuff from. So you can kind of have a little bit of an internal idea as to what that stuff is and kind of like how all that stuff works. So I hope that helps. And if you made it to the end of this video and didn't fall asleep, man, kudos to you, because I guarantee you, if I listened to this, I probably be like watching the Tree Channel or something. I would have already snoozed. All right, but good luck, have fun, and I hope you can figure out what the problem is.